The scream tore from Sarah Ellison's throat before she even opened her eyes. Her body drenched in sweat as she bolted upright in the narrow bed of the boarding house room. Rico, Colorado had been her refuge for 3 weeks now, but the nightmares had followed her across 2 territories and showed no mercy. She pressed trembling hands against her face, feeling the tears already streaming down her cheeks as the images flickered behind her eyelids like a lantern show she could not stop. Fire. So much fire. The crackling timber of her family's ranch house outside Santa Fe. Her father's desperate shouts. Her mother's final scream. "Not again," she whispered into the darkness, though dawn was already painting thin lines of light through the worn curtains. This was the 4th night in a row. Before that, she had managed 2 nights of fitful, broken sleep, but never true rest, never peace. Sarah was 22 years old and felt ancient. The events of 6 months ago had carved years into her face, though people still called her pretty when she ventured into town. Her dark blonde hair hung limp around her shoulders now, and the blue dress she wore during the day had grown loose around her waist. Sleep deprivation and grief were stealing her strength piece by piece, and she knew she could not continue this way much longer. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had lived in Rico for 15 years, knocked softly on the door. "Miss Ellison, you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah called back, her voice hoarse. It was a lie they both knew, but Mrs. Chen was kind enough not to press. "Breakfast in 30 minutes," the older woman said gently, and Sarah heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. She forced herself from bed and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, splashing her face until the cold shocked some awareness back into her body. In the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a ghost. Her eyes were ringed with purple shadows, and her skin had taken on a pallid quality that made her look ill. She had come to Rico because it was small and remote, nestled in the San Juan Mountains where silver mining had created a rough but thriving community. She had thought distance might quiet the nightmares. She had been wrong. By the time Sarah made her way downstairs, the dining room held only a few other boarders. She took her usual seat near the window and accepted the plate of eggs and biscuits Mrs. Chen brought her, though she had little appetite. Outside, Rico was waking up. It was September of 1884, and the mountain air carried the first hints of autumn's chill. The town sprawled along the Dolores River, a collection of wooden buildings and mining operations that had sprung up after silver ore was discovered in the surrounding peaks. It was rough and loud and chaotic, nothing like the quiet ranch where Sarah had grown up. She picked at her food and watched miners heading toward the shafts, their lunch pails swinging. Wagons rumbled past, kicking up dust. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Normal life, continuing all around her while she existed in a fog of exhaustion. "You need to see the doctor," Mrs. Chen said quietly, refilling Sarah's coffee cup. "You are not well." "I just need to sleep," Sarah replied, though even she did not believe it anymore. The nightmares were not a symptom. They were the disease itself, rooted so deep in her mind that no tonic or powder seemed to touch them. That afternoon, Sarah forced herself to walk through town, hoping the activity might tire her body enough to grant her a few hours of true rest. She passed the general store, the assayer's office, and 3 saloons before reaching the edge of town where a small church stood. She had not been raised particularly religious, but lately she found herself drawn to quiet places. She slipped inside and sat in a back pew, letting the silence settle over her like a blanket. The door opened behind her and she tensed, but the footsteps were soft, respectful of the space. A man moved past her to light a candle near the altar, and Sarah found herself watching him. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a lean, muscular build that spoke of hard work. He wore dusty clothes, a cowboy by the look of him, though there were not many cattle operations near Rico's mining-focused economy. He turned, and their eyes met for just a moment. His were a striking hazel green, and there was something steady in his gaze that made Sarah's breath catch. Then he tipped his hat politely and left, the door closing softly behind him. She sat there for another hour, but her mind kept returning to that brief moment of connection. It had been so long since she had felt anything beyond fear and grief that even that small flutter of awareness seemed significant. That night, the nightmares came again. Sarah woke screaming at 2 in the morning, her nightgown soaked through. She heard stirring in the other rooms and felt shame burn through her chest. She was disturbing everyone. Mrs. Chen appeared at her door again, this time bringing a lamp and a cup of chamomile tea. "Miss Ellison, this cannot continue," she said, settling into the chair near Sarah's bed. "You will make yourself truly sick." "I know," Sarah whispered, accepting the tea with shaking hands. "I just do not know how to make it stop. I have tried everything." "What do you see?" "In the nightmares." Sarah's throat tightened. She had not spoken the words aloud to anyone since arriving in Rico. "My family, the fire that killed them. I was away visiting a friend in Santa Fe. When I came home, everything was gone. The house, my parents, my younger brother, all of it just ash, Mrs. Chen's weathered face softened with sympathy. "I am sorry. That is a terrible burden to carry. The worst part is that I do not know how it started. The marshal said it could have been an accident, a lamp, the stove. But there had been trouble with raiders in the area, men who preyed on isolated ranches. I will never know if someone murdered them or if it was just cruel chance." Sarah's voice broke. "Either way, they are gone, and I cannot stop seeing it in my mind. I cannot stop imagining their final moments." Mrs. Chen reached over and squeezed her hand. "Grief is a long road, but you must find a way to walk it without destroying yourself." Over the next few days, Sarah's condition worsened. She began hallucinating from lack of sleep, seeing shadows move in her peripheral vision and hearing voices that were not there. She knew she was unraveling, but every time she closed her eyes, the nightmares waited. It became a war of attrition her body could not win. On the 6th day, she was walking back from the general store when her vision went gray at the edges. She stumbled, and suddenly there were hands catching her, strong and steady. "Easy there, miss. I have got you." Sarah blinked up into hazel green eyes. It was the cowboy from the church. Up close, she could see the weathered tan of his skin, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the concern etched in his features. "I'm all right," she managed, though clearly she was not. "You do not look all right. When did you last eat, or sleep for that matter?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of time spent further south. "I eat," Sarah said defensively, trying to pull away, but her legs were unsteady. "Let me help you back to where you are staying," he said, not releasing his supportive grip on her arm. "You look about ready to collapse right here in the street." She wanted to argue, but she lacked the strength. She let him guide her back to the boarding house, aware of the curious stares they attracted. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, her expression both worried and knowing. "Thank you for bringing her back, Mr. Harrison," she said, and Sarah realized they knew each other. "Happy to help, Mrs. Chen, though I would recommend keeping a close eye on her. She is not well." "I know," Mrs. Chen said sadly. "She does not sleep. The nightmares are too strong." Sarah felt them talking about her as if she were not there, and irritation sparked through her exhaustion. "I am standing right here," she said sharply, "and I am fine." The cowboy, Mr. Harrison, looked at her with something that might have been amusement if the situation were not so serious. "You are many things, miss, but fine is not one of them. Get some rest." He tipped his hat and left, and Sarah let Mrs. Chen guide her upstairs. She wanted to be angry at his presumption, but she was too tired to hold onto the emotion. She collapsed on her bed, fully clothed, and fell into a restless doze, only to wake an hour later with tears on her face and her mother's dying scream echoing in her ears. That evening, as Sarah sat in her room trying to find the energy to go downstairs for dinner, she heard something unexpected. Music. A man's voice, singing low and slow, drifting up from somewhere below her window. She moved to the glass and peered out. In the yard behind the boarding house, Mr. Harrison sat on a wooden crate with a battered guitar across his lap. He was singing an old ballad, something about a ship and the sea and a sailor far from home. His voice was rich and warm, carrying easily in the mountain air. Several of the other boarders had gathered to listen, and Mrs. Chen stood on the back porch with a soft smile on her face. Sarah found herself transfixed. There was something soothing about the melody, something that seemed to reach into the tangled knot of anxiety in her chest and gently loosen it. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than dread. When the song ended, there was appreciative applause. Mr. Harrison grinned and launched into another, this one more upbeat, about a cowboy and his adventures on the trail. Sarah listened until the light faded completely, and when she finally forced herself to lie down, she found that the music had followed her, playing softly in her memory. She still had nightmares that night, but they were shorter, less vivid. She woke only twice instead of 4 or 5 times. It was not much, but it was something. The next morning, Sarah asked Mrs. Chen about Mr. Harrison over breakfast. "Harrison Hayes," the older woman said. "He works at the stables in town, takes care of the horses, does some wrangling when ranchers need extra hands. He has been in Rico for about a year. Good man. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but he has a gift with animals and apparently with music too. Does he often play in your yard?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Chen's eyes twinkled. "First time, though I told him last night that he was welcome to come back any time. Several of the boarders said they found it relaxing." Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest. Had he played because of what Mrs. Chen said about her nightmares? The thought was both embarrassing and oddly touching. That evening, Harrison Hayes returned. Sarah heard the first notes of guitar as she was washing up for dinner and found herself hurrying to finish so she could position herself by the window. This time he sang older songs, folk ballads and hymns that felt timeless. Sarah sat on the floor beneath the window and listened, feeling the music seep into her bones. When she went to bed that night, she hummed one of the melodies to herself. The nightmares still came, but again, they were less intense. She managed almost 4 hours of continuous sleep, and when she woke, she felt marginally more human than she had in weeks. This pattern continued for several days. Harrison would arrive in the early evening and play for an hour or so. Sarah would listen from her window, never going down to join the small audience that gathered, but never missing a performance either. And slowly, incrementally, her sleep improved. The nightmares did not disappear, but they lost some of their razor-sharp edges. She began to wake from them less panicked, more able to calm herself and drift back to sleep. On the 5th evening of Harrison's visits, Sarah finally worked up the courage to go downstairs. She stepped into the yard just as he was finishing a song about a lonesome prairie. He looked up and their eyes met. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face from serious to genuinely warm. "Glad you could join us, Miss Ellison," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, just simple welcome. Sarah found a spot on the porch steps and sat, folding her hands in her lap. "Thank you for playing," she said quietly. "It has helped." "Helped how?" he asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, aware that others were listening. It helps me rest, she finally said, which was true enough without being too revealing. He nodded as if he understood far more than she had said. Music has a way of settling things inside us. My mother used to sing to me and my brothers when we were young, said it was the only way to keep 4 rowdy boys calm enough to sleep. You have 3 brothers? Sarah asked, latching onto the personal detail. Had, Harrison said, and something flickered in his eyes. Lost 2 of them to illness years back. The 3rd went off to seek his fortune in California. Have not heard from him in a while, but I hope he is doing well. There was understanding in that admission of loss. Sarah felt some of her guard lower. I lost my family too, she said softly. That is why the nightmares are so bad. Harrison's expression grew serious. I am sorry to hear that. Loss is a heavy weight to carry alone. I do not know how to put it down, Sarah admitted. Maybe you do not put it down, Harrison said thoughtfully. Maybe you just learn to carry it differently, and maybe music can help with that. He started playing again, this time a gentle instrumental that had no words but somehow conveyed both sadness and hope. Sarah closed her eyes and let it wash over her, and for the first time since the fire, she felt like perhaps healing might actually be possible. After that evening, Sarah and Harrison began to talk more. He would arrive, play his music, and then they would sit on the porch while the others drifted away, speaking quietly about small things. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about learning to work with horses from his grandfather, about drifting west after his parents died and finding himself in Rico, almost by accident. She told him about the ranch in New Mexico, about her father teaching her to ride, about her mother's garden and her brother's terrible jokes. They both carefully avoided the details of their losses, but the acknowledgement that they had both survived terrible things created a bond between them. Sarah's sleep continued to improve. She was getting 5, sometimes 6 hours a night now, and the nightmares, while still present, no longer consumed her. She began to eat more, and color returned to her cheeks. Mrs. Chen commented on the change with obvious relief. "You look like yourself again," the older woman said one morning. "That young man and his music have done you more good than any medicine could." Sarah felt heat rise in her face. "He has been kind," she said carefully. "He has been interested," Mrs. Chen corrected with a knowing smile. "And unless I am much mistaken, you are interested too." Sarah could not deny it. Harrison Hayes had worked his way into her thoughts in a way that surprised her. She found herself looking forward to the evenings, anticipating the sound of his guitar and the low rumble of his voice. She liked the way he listened when she spoke, giving her his full attention. She liked his quiet strength and the gentleness he showed to everyone around him. And yes, she liked the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious. It had been 3 weeks since Harrison started playing in the boarding house yard when he finally asked Sarah if she would like to take a walk with him. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the town was relatively quiet. She agreed, her heart beating faster than the simple invitation warranted. They walked along the river, following a path that led away from the noise of the mining operations. The aspens were turning gold, and the air smelled of pine and autumn. Harrison kept a respectful distance, but Sarah was acutely aware of his presence beside her. "Can I ask what happened to your family?" he said eventually. "You do not have to answer if you do not want to, but sometimes talking about it helps." Sarah took a breath. She had been avoiding this conversation, but perhaps he was right. There was a fire, 6 months ago. I was away visiting a friend, and when I came back, the ranch house was gone. My parents and younger brother were inside. They did not make it out. Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, I am so sorry. That is a nightmare no one should have to live through." "The worst part is not knowing," she continued, the words tumbling out now. not knowing if it was an accident or if someone said it deliberately. There had been trouble in the area, raiders, men who would kill for whatever they could steal. The marshal said there was no way to be sure what caused it. That not knowing would eat at anyone, Harrison said quietly. It leaves all these questions with no answers. Exactly, Sarah said, feeling tears prick her eyes. And in my nightmares, I see 100 different versions of what might have happened. I see them scared and calling for help that never came. I see them in pain. I cannot make it stop. Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and the simple human contact steadied her. You cannot change what happened, he said. But you can choose to remember them as they lived, not just as they died. Every time the nightmare comes, try to replace it with a good memory. Your mother in her garden. Your father teaching you to ride. Your brother telling one of those terrible jokes. That sounds so simple, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Simple does not mean easy, Harrison acknowledged, but I think you are stronger than you know. You survived something that would have broken a lot of people. You got yourself here to safety, even when you were drowning in grief. That takes courage. Sarah looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but sincerity in his face. Why are you doing this? She asked. Helping me, I mean. You do not even know me. Harrison was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I know what it is like to be lost in grief, he said finally. After my brothers died, I went to a dark place. Music was what pulled me back. Playing guitar, singing old songs, it reminded me that there was still beauty in the world even after loss. When Mrs. Chen mentioned your nightmares, I thought maybe I could offer you the same thing that was offered to me. A lifeline. Thank you, Sarah whispered. It is working. You are helping more than you know. They stood there by the river hand in hand, and Sarah felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, the nightmares still waiting. But for the first time, she felt like she was not facing them alone. As the weeks passed, Sarah and Harrison grew closer. He continued to play music in the evenings, but now he played specifically for her, learning songs she mentioned liking and teaching her some of the chords on his guitar. She was not particularly musical, but she loved the intimacy of sitting close to him, his larger hands guiding hers into position on the strings. They took walks every Sunday, exploring the mountains around Rico. He showed her abandoned mining claims and hidden meadows, places where the wilderness asserted itself over human ambition. She told him stories about her family, the good memories Harrison had encouraged her to focus on, and found that speaking them aloud made them feel more real than the nightmares. Her sleep continued to improve. Some nights she made it through without nightmares at all, and when they did come, she was able to use Harrison's technique of replacing the terrible images with happier ones. It did not always work, but it worked often enough to make a difference. She also noticed other changes. She was smiling more, laughing at things Harrison said, at the antics of the town characters, at simple pleasures like a beautiful sunset or a particularly good meal. She was reconnecting with life, and it felt both wonderful and terrifying. I feel guilty sometimes, she admitted to Harrison one evening in late October. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, bundled in coats against the mountain chill. For being happy, like I am betraying their memory by moving forward. Your family would want you to be happy, Harrison said firmly. No parent wants their child to spend their life in mourning. No brother wants his sister to suffer endlessly. The best way to honor them is to live fully, to find joy again. That does not mean forgetting them. It means carrying them with you into whatever comes next. When did you get so wise? Sarah teased gently. Harrison grinned. I have my moments, usually by accident. Sarah laughed, and the sound surprised her. It felt so natural now, so easy. A month ago, she would not have believed she could laugh like that again. "I care about you, Sarah," Harrison said suddenly, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I hope you know that. This has become more than just trying to help someone who was hurting. Somewhere along the way, I started falling for you." Sarah's breath caught. She had known, on some level, that her feelings for Harrison had deepened beyond gratitude. She looked forward to seeing him with an anticipation that had nothing to do with his ability to quiet her nightmares. She thought about him during the day, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to their evening conversations. When he smiled at her, her heart did that strange, fluttering thing that she was beginning to recognize as attraction. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I did not think I could feel this way again. After losing everyone, I thought maybe that part of me was broken, but you have made me want to try, to hope." Harrison reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We can take this as slow as you need," he said. "There is no rush. I just wanted you to know where I stand." "I appreciate that," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "But I do not want to be too careful either. I have learned that life is fragile and unpredictable. If there is a chance for happiness, I want to take it." Harrison leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful, and somehow more intimate than anything Sarah had experienced before. She closed her eyes and savored it, this moment of pure connection. As November arrived and the first snow dusted the peaks around Rico, Sarah realized she was truly healing. The nightmares had not disappeared entirely, but they came only once or twice a week now, and they no longer controlled her life. She was sleeping through most nights, waking refreshed and ready to face the day. She had even started thinking about the future, about what she wanted to do now that survival was no longer her only goal. She still had the small inheritance from the ranch sale, enough to live modestly for a while or invest in something new. She had been considering her options, talking them through with Harrison, who listened thoughtfully and offered suggestions without trying to make decisions for her. "You could open a shop," he said one evening. "You mentioned your mother was skilled at sewing. Maybe a dressmaker's shop, maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Or I could invest in property. Rico is growing. There will always be need for housing." "You have time to decide," Harrison said. "No need to rush into anything." But privately, Sarah knew what she really wanted. She wanted a home again. Not just a room in a boarding house, but a real home. And increasingly, she wanted that home to include Harrison. She was not sure when exactly she fell in love with him. It was not a single moment, but rather an accumulation of small things. The way he always made sure she had eaten. The patience he showed when teaching her guitar chords. The stories he told about his work with horses, his face lighting up with genuine passion. The quiet strength he radiated, the sense that he was someone who could be relied upon when things got difficult. All of it had combined to create feelings that went far deeper than gratitude or attraction. She loved him. And based on the way he looked at her, the way he found excuses to touch her hand or tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, she thought he might love her too. In mid-November, Harrison invited Sarah to visit the stables where he worked. She had not spent much time around horses since coming to Rico, and she found herself both eager and nervous as they walked through town together. The stable was a large wooden structure on the edge of town, housing perhaps 20 horses in individual stalls. The smell of hay and leather and animal warmth enveloped her as they entered, and Sarah felt a pang of homesickness for the ranch. "This is my domain," Harrison said with a touch of pride. "Not much to look at, but the horses are well cared for." He introduced her to each horse by name, telling her their personalities and quirks. There was Dusty, a gray mare with a gentle disposition. Scout, a large chestnut gelding who liked to steal hats. Pepper, a black stallion who was beautiful but temperamental. Harrison handled each of them with easy confidence, and Sarah could see the affection they had for him in the way they nuzzled his hands and nickered softly when he approached. "You want to ride?" he asked, gesturing to Dusty. "She is the calmest horse I have ever met. Perfect for getting back in the saddle." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Harrison saddled Dusty efficiently and helped Sarah mount, his hands steady on her waist as he lifted her up. The familiar feeling of a horse beneath her brought tears to her eyes, but they were good tears, bittersweet with memory but not devastating. Harrison mounted Scout, and they rode out of the stable together, heading for the open land beyond town. It felt glorious to be riding again, the wind in her face and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her. They rode for an hour, not talking much, just existing together in the landscape. When they finally returned to the stable, Sarah was exhilarated and exhausted in equal measure. Harrison helped her dismount, and this time when his hands found her waist, he did not immediately let go. He looked down at her, his hazel-green eyes searching her face. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I love you. I need you to know that. I am not saying it to pressure you or to expect anything in return. I just need you to know." Sarah felt her heart expand in her chest, warmth flooding through her. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both enormous and completely natural. "I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it." Harrison's face broke into a wide smile, and he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Sarah melted into the embrace, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had not felt since before the fire. When he tilted her chin up and kissed her, she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. It was not a long kiss, but it was deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Harrison's eyes were bright with happiness. "I would like to court you properly," he said, "if you will have me." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, I will have you." As winter settled over Rico in earnest, Sarah and Harrison's courtship deepened. He took her to community dances, where they swirled around the floor to fiddle music and laughter. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but always thoughtful. A book of poetry, a warm scarf he had noticed her eyeing in the general store, a bundle of dried flowers that still smelled faintly of summer. She cooked meals for him when Mrs. Chen allowed her to use the kitchen, discovering that she enjoyed providing for him in that simple way. She mended a tear in his favorite shirt and smiled at his delight when he saw the neat stitches. She met his friends, other men who worked with livestock or in the mines, and found herself welcomed into their circle. The nightmares continued to fade. There were weeks now where she slept soundly every night, and when the bad dreams did come, she had developed tools to manage them. She would wake, remind herself where she was and that she was safe, and often she would hum one of Harrison's songs until her heartbeat slowed and she could return to sleep. In December, Harrison took her to a Christmas celebration at the church. The small building was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and the congregation sang carols with more enthusiasm than skill. Afterward, there was hot cider and cookies, and Sarah found herself laughing and chatting with people who were becoming friends. "You look happy, Mrs. Chen observed, coming to stand beside Sarah. "It is good to see." "I am happy," Sarah admitted. "Happier than I thought I could be again." "That young man is good for you," Mrs. Chen said approvingly, "but you are also good for him. I have seen the change in him too. He smiles more now. Seems lighter somehow." Sarah had noticed that too. Harrison had carried his own grief, his own losses, and helping her had seemed to help him as well. They had healed each other in ways that went beyond words. On Christmas Eve, Harrison came to the boarding house with his guitar and played carols for everyone. The other boarders sang along, and Mrs. Chen served spiced wine. It was a lovely evening, full of warmth and community, and when it ended, Harrison asked Sarah to step outside with him. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Their breath misted in the air as they stood on the porch, and Harrison pulled a small package from his coat pocket. "I made this for you," he said, handing it to her. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something special." Sarah unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of flowers and vines. She opened it to discover a piece of paper inside with handwritten lyrics to a new song. "I wrote it for you," Harrison said, suddenly shy. "It is called Sarah's Song. I thought maybe the music that has helped you sleep could be something you carry with you always." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Will you sing it for me?" Harrison picked up his guitar and began to play. The melody was gentle and soothing, and the lyrics spoke of darkness giving way to dawn, of finding light after loss, of love being a lantern in the night. It was beautiful and personal and perfect. When he finished, Sarah was crying openly. "It is wonderful," she whispered. "Thank you. This is the best gift I have ever received." Harrison set down the guitar and pulled her into his arms. "You have given me so much, Sarah. You have given me purpose and joy and a reason to believe in the future again. I love you more than I can put into words." "I love you too," Sarah said, holding him tight. "You saved me, Harrison. You brought me back from a place I did not think I could return from." "We saved each other," Harrison corrected gently. "That is what love does." As the new year of 1885 arrived, Sarah and Harrison began talking seriously about their future. Marriage was the unspoken destination they were both heading toward, but neither wanted to rush. They were building something solid and real, and they both understood the value of a strong foundation. In February, Harrison approached the subject directly. They were walking by the river, bundled against the cold, when he stopped and turned to face her. "Sarah Ellison, I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said simply. "I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a home with you and maybe, someday, a family. Will you marry me?" It was not the most eloquent proposal, but it was honest and heartfelt, and that was all Sarah needed. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Harrison Hayes, I will absolutely marry you." He kissed her then, long and deep, and Sarah felt the last pieces of her broken heart click back into place. She had survived the fire. She had survived the grief and the nightmares, and the feeling that she would never be whole again. And she had found love in the process, real and true and strong enough to build a life on. They were married in April, when the spring flowers were blooming and the snow was melting from the mountains. It was a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Chen and a handful of friends in attendance. Sarah wore a blue dress she had made herself, and Harrison wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed for once. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation cheered. They moved into a small house on the outskirts of Rico, a two-room cabin that Harrison had been renting for the past year. It was modest, but it was theirs, and Sarah threw herself into making it a home. She sewed curtains for the windows and braided a rug for the floor. Harrison built furniture, a better table and chairs, shelves for her growing collection of books. At night, they would lie in bed together, and Harrison would sing softly until Sarah drifted off to sleep. The nightmares were rare now, maybe once a month, and when they came, Harrison was there to hold her and remind her that she was safe, that she was loved, that the past could not hurt her anymore. Sarah found work as a seamstress, taking in mending and making dresses for the women of Rico. She discovered she had her mother's skill with a needle, and her reputation grew quickly. Harrison continued working at the stables, and together they saved money with an eye toward the future. In the summer of 1885, Sarah realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of starting a family with Harrison, but also fear. Fear that something would go wrong. Fear that she would lose this new life the way she had lost so much already. Fear that the nightmares would return with a vengeance. Harrison noticed her anxiety and sat her down to talk about it. "It is okay to be scared," he said, taking her hands in his. "After what you have been through, it would be strange if you were not, but we are in this together. You are not alone." "What if I cannot do this?" Sarah asked, voicing her deepest worry. "What if I am not strong enough?" "You are the strongest person I know," Harrison said firmly. "You survived something that should have destroyed you and you came out the other side. You can absolutely do this. And I will be with you every step of the way." His faith in her was absolute, and it steadied Sarah in a way nothing else could. She leaned into his strength while also discovering reserves of her own. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Sarah was often tired and occasionally sick. Harrison doted on her, bringing her ginger tea for the nausea and rubbing her feet when they ached. He sang to her belly silly songs about animals and adventures, and Sarah would laugh and feel her worries ease. In December, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah was certain she could not continue. But Harrison stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Sarah wept with relief and joy. They named him Henry, after Harrison's grandfather. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the very beginning, he was loved fiercely by both parents. Adjusting to life with a baby was chaotic. Henry was a poor sleeper in those early weeks, waking every few hours to nurse. Sarah was exhausted in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of the days when nightmares kept her from rest. But this was different. This exhaustion came with purpose and love, and she had Harrison to share the burden. He would walk the floor with Henry when the baby was fussy, singing the same songs that had once soothed Sarah. And miraculously, they worked on their son too. Henry would settle against his father's chest, his tiny fist clutching Harrison's shirt, and drift off to sleep. "You have magic in your voice," Sarah told Harrison one night watching them together. "Not magic," Harrison said with a smile. "Just love set to music." As Henry grew, Sarah found herself thinking often about her own family. She wished her parents could have met their grandson. She wished her brother could have been an uncle. The grief of their absence was still there, but it no longer consumed her. She carried it quietly now, a constant ache that had become part of who she was. She told Henry stories about them as he got older. About his grandmother's garden and his grandfather's skill with horses. About the uncle he would never meet who had been funny and kind and full of life. She wanted him to know where he came from, to understand that he was connected to people who had lived and loved and mattered. The nightmares never completely disappeared, but they became manageable. Sometimes months would pass without one, and when they did occur, Sarah had strategies to cope. She would wake Harrison, and he would hold her and hum softly until the fear receded. Or she would get up and check on Henry, reminding herself that life continued, that good things still existed. As Henry's first birthday approached, Sarah realized how much had changed in the 2 years since she arrived in Rico. She had been broken then, barely functional, consumed by grief and terror. Now she was whole again, or as whole as anyone could be after such loss. She had rebuilt her life from ashes, literally and figuratively, and she had done it with Harrison's help and love. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had not met? She asked Harrison one evening. They were sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink while Henry napped inside. Sometimes, Harrison admitted, I think we both would have survived. We are both survivors by nature, but I do not think we would have thrived, not the way we have together. You saved me, Sarah said, not for the first time. And you saved me right back, Harrison replied, also not for the first time. That is what partnership is. Being strong when the other person is weak. Believing when the other person doubts. Loving when it feels impossible to be loved. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling content in a way that once seemed impossible. I want more children, she said suddenly. I want Henry to have siblings. I want a big, noisy family. Harrison kissed the top of her head. Then that is what we will have. As many children as you want. As much noise and chaos and love as this little cabin can hold. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter arrived in 1887, a tiny thing with her father's hazel green eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Helen, and she was a delight from the beginning, easier than Henry had been and full of smiles. Another son followed in 1889, and they named him James. He was a quiet baby, content to observe the world with solemn gray eyes that seemed far too wise for an infant. The cabin became too small for their expanding family, so Harrison began building an addition. Sarah helped when she could, holding boards steady while he hammered and painting walls once they were erected. It was hard work, but it was satisfying to see their home grow along with their family. Sarah's seamstress business continued to thrive, though she had less time for it now with 3 children to care for. She took on only the projects that interested her, custom dresses for special occasions, and she earned enough to contribute meaningfully to the household income. Harrison was promoted to stable manager, overseeing several other workers and earning a better wage. He still played music in the evenings, now for his children as well as for Sarah. They would gather in the parlor after dinner, and he would sing while the children danced or clapped or simply listened with rapt attention. The nightmares continued to fade as the years passed. By the time Helen was born, Sarah was having them only a few times a year. By the time James arrived, they were even rarer. The music had worked its magic, along with time and love and the building of new memories that crowded out the terrible ones. In 1891, when Henry was 6, Helen 4, and James 2, Sarah realized she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her exhausted and unwell for months. Harrison took on more of the child care, cooking meals and supervising bedtimes with patient good humor. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Harriet, was born in early 1892. The labor was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, the midwife was uncertain whether Sarah would survive. But she pulled through, and when she held her new daughter for the first time, she was overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she had built. 4 children, Harrison said wonderingly, looking at his expanding brood with pride. We have a real family now. We always had a real family, Sarah corrected. It just keeps getting bigger. As their children grew, Sarah made sure to teach them about the family they had lost. She told them about the ranch in New Mexico, about the grandparents and uncle they would never meet. She wanted them to understand that love persisted beyond death, that the people we lost remained with us in memory and story. Henry, as the oldest, took these stories seriously. He would ask questions about what his grandfather was like, what his uncle enjoyed doing. Sarah answered as best she could, painting pictures with her words of people she still missed desperately. Helen was more interested in the happy stories, the funny moments and small joys. She loved hearing about her grandmother's garden and would help Sarah tend their own small plot of vegetables and flowers. James and Harriet were still too young to fully understand, but Sarah knew that someday they too would want to know where they came from. The nightmares, by this point, were almost entirely gone. Sarah would go years without experiencing one, and when they did occasionally surface, they were distant and muted, easily dismissed upon waking. The healing that had begun with Harrison's music had continued through years of love and life-building, until the grief that had once defined her was simply one part of a much larger and happier story. In 1895, Rico began to change. The silver mines were producing less, and people were starting to leave for opportunities elsewhere. Harrison and Sarah discussed their options, wondering if they should stay or seek their fortune in a more stable town. "What do you want to do?" Harrison asked. "This is your decision as much as mine." Sarah looked around their home at the life they had built in Rico. Her children had been born here, she had healed here. It held memories both painful and precious. "I want to stay," she said finally. "At least for now. This is our home. We can adapt to whatever changes come." Harrison nodded, looking relieved. "I was hoping you would say that. I am not ready to leave yet either." They weathered the economic changes together. Harrison's stable remained busy even as the mining operations slowed, serving the remaining population and the travelers who still passed through. Sarah's sewing skills were always in demand. They tightened their belts when necessary and found ways to make their money stretch further. Through it all, their love remained constant. Harrison still sang to Sarah, though now it was often interrupted by children demanding attention or songs of their own. She still made his favorite meals and mended his clothes with care. They still took walks by the river when they could steal time away from their responsibilities, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. In 1898, on their 13th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Sarah with a new guitar. His old one was battered and worn, but he had kept using it because he could not justify the expense of a replacement with 4 children to feed. "I have been saving," Sarah explained at his shocked expression. "A little bit from every sewing job for the past 2 years. You need a good instrument. The music you make is too important." Harrison was touched beyond words. That evening he played for hours, his new guitar's clear tones filling their home. The children danced, and Sarah watched her family with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what she had built from the ashes of tragedy. Not a replacement for what she had lost, but something entirely new and precious. A loud, chaotic, loving family. A partnership with a man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. A life that honored both her past and her future. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th century approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. From the devastated young woman who arrived in Rico in 1884, unable to sleep and haunted by nightmares, to the confident mother and wife she had become. It had been a long road, full of pain and struggle, but also full of love and healing. Henry was now 14 and showing his father's skill with horses. Helen was 12 and had inherited Sarah's talent for sewing. James, at 10, was quiet and studious, always with his nose in a book. And Harriet, at 7, was fearless and funny, keeping everyone on their toes. Harrison, at 39, still had the same steady strength that had first attracted Sarah to him, though his hair was starting to show threads of silver. Sarah herself was 36, and while the years had left their marks, she felt more beautiful now than she ever had in her youth. She had earned every line on her face, every gray hair, through surviving and thriving. On New Year's Eve of 1899, as the town of Rico celebrated the turning of the century, Harrison and Sarah stood together on their porch, watching fireworks light up the night sky. Their children were inside, supervised by a neighbor, and for a few moments they had peace to reflect. "Can you believe we have been together for 15 years?" Harrison asked, wrapping his arm around Sarah's waist. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime," Sarah said, "and sometimes it feels like yesterday that you first sang to me in Mrs. Chen's yard." "You still have nightmares?" Harrison asked. It had been years since he had needed to ask, but the question hung in the air between them. "No," Sarah said honestly. "Not for a long time now. I dream of other things. Good things, mostly. Our children. Our life together. Sometimes I dream of my family, but they are happy dreams now. Memories, not nightmares." "I am glad," Harrison said softly. "You deserve peace. You have worked so hard for it." "We both have," Sarah corrected. "You taught me that healing was possible, that love could exist after loss. I could not have done any of this without you." Harrison turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Sarah Hayes, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. These past 15 years have been the greatest gift of my life. Here is to 50 more." "50 more," Sarah agreed, and they kissed as fireworks exploded overhead, welcoming the new century and all the possibilities it held. As the years continued to roll forward, Sarah and Harrison's family remained the center of their world. Henry grew into a fine young man and eventually took over the stable business when Harrison decided to step back from the daily operations. Helen opened her own dressmaking shop, her skills surpassing even her mother's. James went to college, something neither of his parents had been able to do, and became a teacher. Harriet married young to a rancher's son and started her own family. Sarah and Harrison became grandparents, and they embraced the role with joy. They told their grandchildren the same stories Sarah had told her own children, about the family in New Mexico and the long journey to healing. The nightmares that had once controlled Sarah's life became simply part of the family history, a dark period that had been overcome. In 1910, Mrs. Chen passed away at the age of 78. Her funeral was well attended, and Sarah wept for the woman who had been so kind during her darkest days. Harrison sang at the service, his voice older now but still strong, and Sarah held his hand and remembered all the ways their lives had been touched by the people of Rico. As they entered their 60s, Harrison and Sarah settled into a comfortable routine. They had sold the cabin years ago and bought a larger house in town, one with room for visiting children and grandchildren. Harrison still played music every evening, though now his fingers sometimes ached with arthritis, and he had to stop more frequently to rest. Sarah still sewed, making quilts and baby clothes for her expanding family. They took walks when the weather permitted, moving slower now but still finding joy in each other's company. They talked about everything and nothing, the way couples who have spent decades together can do. They reminisced about the early days of their relationship, laughed about the chaos of raising 4 children, and marveled at how quickly time had passed. In 1920, on their 35th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The entire family gathered, including grandchildren and a few great-grandchildren, and the house was full of noise and laughter and love. Harrison played his guitar, the instrument Sarah had given him all those years ago, and everyone sang along to old songs and new ones. Sarah looked around at the faces of her family and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was what had come from the ashes of tragedy, this abundance of love and life. Her parents and brother would never be forgotten, but they were no longer a source of pain. They were simply part of her story, the foundation on which everything else had been built. That night, after everyone had gone home, Sarah and Harrison lay in bed together. Do you ever think about how we started? Sarah asked. How broken I was when we met. I think about how brave you were, Harrison said. Coming to a new place all alone, trying to find a way to survive. I think about how you let me help you, even though you had every reason to trust no one. I think about how you rebuilt yourself into this incredible woman who has given me the most wonderful life. I could say the same about you, Sarah said, tears in her eyes. You saved me with your music and your patience and your love. You gave me a reason to keep going when I did not think I had one. Everything good in my life comes from that. We saved each other, Harrison said, repeating the phrase that had become their truth. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. As the 1920s progressed, age began to slow them both. Harrison's hands grew too stiff to play guitar for long periods, though he still sang whenever he could. Sarah's eyesight weakened, making sewing difficult, though she persisted with the help of magnifying glasses. They relied more on their children, accepting help with grace when it was offered. In 1925, Harrison fell ill with pneumonia. For weeks, Sarah sat by his bedside, singing the songs he had once sung to her. She sang about ships and seas and cowboys on the trail. She sang about love and loss and hope. And slowly, miraculously, he recovered. You brought me back, he said when he was finally strong enough to sit up. The way I once brought you back, full circle. Always, Sarah said, kissing his forehead. I will always bring you back if I can. They lived several more years in relative health, enjoying their family and the quiet life they had built. In 1930, on a warm June evening, Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 70 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Sarah was devastated by his loss, but she did not break the way she had broken after the fire. She grieved deeply and truly, but she also remembered all the lessons Harrison had taught her. She focused on the good memories, the decades of love and partnership. She leaned on her children and grandchildren. And at night, when the loneliness was worst, she sang Harrison's songs to herself and felt his presence in the music. She lived another 10 years without him, remaining active and engaged with her family. She told stories about Harrison to her great-grandchildren, making sure they knew what kind of man their great-grandfather had been. She kept his guitar in a place of honor in her home, and sometimes her grandchildren would play it, filling the house with music once again. In 1940, at the age of 78, Sarah Ellison Hayes passed away peacefully, surrounded by her children. Her last words were about Harrison, about seeing him again, about the music waiting for her. Her family buried her next to her husband in the Rico Cemetery, under a tree that had been planted the year they married. The inscription on their shared headstone read, Harrison and Sarah Hayes, united in love, forever in harmony. 1851, 1930, and 1862, 1940. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for generations. About the cowboy who sang away a young woman's nightmares. About the healing power of music and love. About two people who had found each other in the midst of grief and built something beautiful together. In Rico, Colorado, in a small cemetery overlooking the mountains, their legacy lived on. Not just in the descendants who carried their names and their stories, but in the proof that healing was possible, that love could triumph over loss, and that sometimes the darkest nights gave way to the most beautiful dawns. The nightmares that had once plagued Sarah were long forgotten, replaced by dreams of music and family and a life well lived. The cowboy who had sung her to sleep had become her partner, her love, her home. And together, they had created something that would last far beyond their own years. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and carried forward through generations. A testament to the power of compassion, the necessity of human connection, and the enduring truth that even the most broken hearts can heal when given patience, music, and love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The nightmares had been conquered, the songs had done their work, and two souls who had been lost in darkness had found each other and built a life filled with light.